Welcome to our annual briefing session for our ULI Awards for Excellence program. We hold this every year, basically originally at the request of quite a few of our participants, because the award can be quite complicated to understand, and in order for people to have the best chance of success, we think it's a good idea to sort of outline on a person-to-person basis what types of characteristics applications should have, what they should do, how they should present their projects, and give people a chance to ask some questions as we go along. So the purpose here is to fill in all those blanks and give any and all of you the chance to ask any questions you might have. Although, of course, this will also be linked to our website, and you'll be able to watch it later on and ask questions as you go. So to start with, we're going to give just a brief history of the awards and understand. Can I just confirm that we've got the deck up, because I'm not seeing it right now on my own screen?
Yes, it should be showing right now.
Should be showing. Okay, good. Well, on that basis, I'll just continue. First of all, let's give a rundown of the history of the awards. This has been going on in Asia Pac for, I think this is the 7th year. It's been going on rather longer in the USA. It has attracted around usually 50 plus applicants each year. I think last year was a little bit subdued. I think we probably had a few fewer applicants coming in from China, given that the markets there are a bit depressed, but we would usually expect anywhere between 50 and 80 submissions each time. We see this not in terms of the usual way of awards programs as a competition designed to showcase design, although that is, of course, included, but there's also many other things as well. We're looking to include also factors such as the participation, contribution to the community that any given project has, and other things as well, which we'll go into as we pass through this webinar. So what we will do is to give some examples of previous submissions, some projects. I think we have about 4 projects that we'll look at to give people an idea of what types of projects tend to be successful. We will tell you how to submit the projects in sort of physical terms, where to go, how to access the application form from our website. We'll have a Q&A session after that and discuss some tips about how to improve your prospects of success for your submission. So feel free to ask questions as we go. Just type them into the box on the Zoom channel, and we'll line them up and address them either as we go or more likely towards the end of this session. Okay. So, Keneala, can we get the third slide? And not, as I say, I don't see right now what you're looking at on the screen, so I'm going to have to go blind here. There are 3 projects of this type throughout the world. So that, yes, I'm just getting a message here. No, I still can't see the form, but anyway, we'll just go blind. 3 across the world. There's 1 in America, 1 in Asia Pac, and 1 in Europe. And each one generally will have similar numbers of submissions, apart from the one in Europe, which tends to have rather fewer. In previous years, we've had a global awards project as well, which gathers together the winners of all of the different regional programs and then presents them to a global jury, which then sort of selects the winners on a global basis to win sort of higher level award. That isn't going to take place this year. There are some years in which we have a gap and take a pass on that. So there will be no global award on this occasion. There'll just be the 3 regional sessions. Right, let's look at the jury. So we can move on to the next slide, Camille. So we have a regional jury. Generally, it consists of around 13 different jurors selected from around the region. And as you can see from the slide, in this case, they are generally centered around those from which we receive the most applications. So we would have 3 jurors, for example, from China, 2 generally in Shanghai, 1 in Beijing, a couple from Australia, a couple from Japan, Singapore, Hong Kong, and so on. In order to allow the distribution to be fairly evenly spread. As you can see, we only have 8 jurors that are currently appointed. Every year, we'll have a certain number of jurors that roll off, and we'll be appointing new ones to take their place. So at the moment, we've yet to fill those spaces. But you can see of those that were with us last year, these are the ones that will carry on. The jury meetings take place firstly at the end of March. That will be the first one. All of the submissions are then considered by the jury over a course of 2 days. And around 20 or so, probably between, say, 18 to 20 finalists are appointed at that point. There's then a month during which we will have site visits. Generally, these will be physical site visits. This is another reason why we spread the jury around the region, so that those people in individual markets have the best chance to visit sites individually in person. It may be, in the case of projects that are a long way from any of where any places where our jury are based, it may be impossible for the jury to attend, in which case we'll have a virtual site visit, which will be basically the same type of thing. It'll be done live, usually by Zoom, and as many jurors as possible will attend and ask questions in the normal way. So that goes on for during the month period between the first and the second jury meeting. And then, as I said, the second jury meeting takes place, another virtual session for the jury, at which point they will select anywhere between generally 10 and 15 winners. We try and aim for around 10, but in any given year, it really depends on the quality of the submissions. So there's no set number of winners in a given year. Basically, it's a question of whether or not any given project can meet the particular criteria that are set. And if it's good enough, then it will receive an award in principle. So it's impossible to say in any given year how many will actually win. Another factor to take into account is that although there are categories, whether it's office, retail, open space, etc., in which any given project can be placed, it's not an award that is given in relation to any given category. Right? You win an award for excellence. You don't win an award for excellence for office. And so in that sense, you don't need to, if, for example, your projects can be categorized across different typologies, whether it's an office project that has open space with it, you only need to enter your project one time. And as long as you do that, then it will be sufficient. Sometimes we get people that try and enter twice, and they enter 2 different submissions. No need for that. One is plenty. All right, and then the final issue here, I think, is to emphasize again that this is not simply a question of design. We're looking for the whole 9 yards, the various criteria set out in the submission form, but we were looking at things like contributions to the community, whether or not it's sustainable, whether it's replicable, and so on and so on. All right, let's move on at this point to the individual examples of projects that have been successful in the past. So again, I can't see, but Camille, if you can turn us to the first one. This one will be one that won a couple of years ago in Australia, called key quarter. Now, the key quarter area involves a couple of different typologies, which actually goes back to what I was just saying. This could have been entered in either the office category or in the open space category, or actually not the open space. It would be more of a placemaking typology, but which would involve retail and also some residential components. But in this case, the office tower was an old 50-year-old building. The AMP Tower that has long been in place in Sydney had grown out of date, basically, and the owners wanted to redevelop the area. But the council in this case refused to allow them to build a higher building on the basis that it had to be in line, any new building had to be in line with the height limitations that had been set for the rest of the neighborhood. And so the owners were left with the only possibility, if they had wanted to retain the original height, of adapting the existing structure. And so what they did was sort of take out the outlying parts of the building and retained the original core, which is firstly technically very difficult to do, and secondly it is actually something that is really quite sustainable, because there was much less waste involved in demolishing the original structure, and the type of excess waste that would be involved in terms of embodied carbon was therefore saved. So the new building was a triumph of design, I think it would be fair to say, has won many design competitions. And also inside, the way in which the interior spaces are arranged were very innovative and creative. But beyond that, the entire area, which is also owned by the same owner, was also redeveloped. And this, well, actually, it wasn't redeveloped. It was basically upgraded and repurposed. So there are some old buildings, some historical sections of town, which are probably 100, at least 100 years old, perhaps even 200 years old, that hail from some of the first occupation of Sydney. And the owners then repurposed these for retail and residential purposes, and from a placemaking perspective, made it much more usable and open to the public. So it ticked all of those boxes at the same time. We move on to the next one. This is a project, again, a couple of years ago, that was filed from Japan. And this is interesting insofar as it shows that you don't need to be a big landlord or a big developer in order to win an award. In fact, very often, some of the best or the best received applications that we get are from very small projects that were commissioned and executed on a shoestring. And this is one example of that. This is in Japan. There was a site in Fukushima, or near Fukushima, north of Tokyo, that was located on the coast, that was very badly damaged by the tsunami in that episode in 2011. And there was an architect that was connected historically to the site, who, together with the Dutch embassy in Tokyo, that decided to make a sort of charitable contribution to the area in terms of creating a space that could be used by the kids and by society, in the local society in general of this area. And they created this space which was usable for preschool children to hold lessons, and then also for other people later on for whatever social events that they wanted to use it for. So it is very, I suppose you'd say, charitably designed, in the sense that it is very usable for different purposes, and has been a very useful addition to the community in various ways. And I think at this point it's likely to be turned into a school, from what I've heard, and will continue to play a functional role within society going forward. But useful, as I say, to show that it's not only the big players that do well. Anybody can enter this, and very often the smaller projects like this are successful. In fact, I think this project also passed on to the Global Award competition, and when that happened, it did win a global award as well. So it's not just on a regional basis that they can be successful, but they can also break through on a global basis. All right, for the next one, we'll move on to a project in China. This is the Sichuan River Ecological Restoration. This is an open space project. We do get quite a few projects of this kind in China. And they refer to a river reclamation in this case. Of course, there has been a large industrial component as the Chinese society has grown over the years, and pollution has been a problem, particularly in the past, where a lot of effluent and waste was just thrown in the local river systems. And the governments, and both provincial and national, have been quite active in trying to regenerate local river and ecological systems close to rivers, in order to regenerate them for the local people. And in this case, this was a relatively small project, in that there was a river that was very polluted from upstream, and the local developers basically dredged out the system. They create a winding river course, inserted various types of plant life on the banks to filter out pollutants, and also created inline linear river parks along both sides for use by the public communities. And as you can see in the photo here, there are housing developments along each side, sporting events, various types of activities that can be pursued by the local inhabitants. So this is, I think, a very good example of placemaking, and the type of project that is quite common, not only in China, but elsewhere. We get quite a few parks, one type or another, that are submitted to the program. One aspect of this, which is, I think, quite useful to note, is that this type of project is highly replicable. So if you're involved in some kind of open place project where you're obviously providing a benefit to the community, and doing it in a way which is innovative, and which can be used by others in creating similar types of projects in other places, then this will, gain you brownie points with the jury. It's definitely an issue which the jury is looking for in order to assess the quality of the project. So in this case, obviously it's highly replicable, and it is the type of project which we do see being submitted increasingly, in fact, from China and elsewhere. All right, if we can move on to the next one. Again, a project in China. It is the Namtao Ancient City. So this is an urban revitalization project on a very large scale. It takes place in Shenzhen. Shenzhen is a city just across the border, if you don't know, probably you do, from Hong Kong. Grew up very quickly since around the beginning of the 1990s. And in the course of that, the new city basically absorbed various pre-existing villages that were always in place along the Hong Kong border. And it fell into something of a gray area in terms of urban planning regulations, in that the government wasn't able to impose the types of regulations that, or urban planning rules that you would expect from a large urban space, such as a city, because these had their own jurisdictions, and the local government had no way to impose rules upon pre-existing villages. And so they became really quite crowded in themselves, and they had quite a few characteristics which were not particularly desirable. But what's going on now is that developers in China, in line with local governments and also local designers, are moving in to try and improve the environment and revitalize it without sort of laying waste to it and having a wholesale redevelopment with tower blocks, whether office or residential. And in this case, that was done in an area, I think it was around 73,000 square meters, 300 buildings, something like 20,000 residents. So a very large scale project where the designers and the developers basically revitalized some of the ancient buildings. You can see on the right-hand photo here, ancient temples, and then upgraded some of the local buildings so that they were more sympathetic to local requirements, created open spaces, created some art galleries, more facilities for the community, be it by way of education or whatever social use they wanted to put it to. So that's an example of a project which is very wide scale on its basis and looks to improve the quality of life throughout an entire community. All right, so that I think is the last example of different projects and typologies, just to give you an idea of what has won in the past and the types of things that the jury might be looking for. Now we'll move on to give you an idea, just quickly, of how to submit your projects. And this shows on the left-hand side the website, which is, if you haven't seen it already, I think probably many of you will already know what it is, but if you just search in Google ULI Asia Pac Awards, it will take you to the site. And on the site, you'll see at the bottom submission guidelines. And this is a PDF form, which is just an example of what type of things to think about in much the same way as I'm giving you now, except this will be in more detail. I can't possibly go into all of the various issues within the scope of this presentation. It does exist in different languages, so you will see, I think also, apart from the English version, Japanese and Chinese, and that will make it easier for people in those countries to understand the rules. And then there are also at the bottom templates of the application form. These are not application form in itself. These are just templates that you can download, help you to understand, because these will also be in Chinese and in Japanese, what the questions are asking for. The actual form itself, if you can see from the top of the screen, is accessed through the website itself. And so if you click that button, it will take you through to the form either directly if you're already logged in and you're a ULI member. If you're not a member, it will invite you to create an account. A little bit confusing here. You're not being asked to join the ULI. You're just being asked to fill in some details so that the system can populate the application form and so that we know who you are and how to get in touch with you and so on. Anyway, once you do that, you'll be taken through to the application form itself. Now let's see, if we go through some of the individual requirements, the form consists of a number of questions which are fairly obvious in themselves to fill those in. It also requires the submission of a PowerPoint presentation. And please note that this is a requirement that the presentation be submitted in PowerPoint form, not in PDF form, as many people do. It's much easier for the jury to consider the individual presentations if they're in order and they're all in the same format. The PowerPoint itself is perhaps the most important single component of of the application. Not to say that the information that you give within the form itself that's typed out isn't important, but the way it works is that each submission will be assigned to one particular juror who will then study it in detail and then present that submission to the rest of the jury, who will look at the PDF, or sorry, the PowerPoint presentation that is also submitted together with the textual version in order to tell a story. So basically that is the idea of the PowerPoint, is to tell the story of the submission in graphical format, in a visual format. And that's really how you want to look at it, to see it as a way of explaining to the jury in a visual form what it is that it's all about. Now, in terms of length, you don't want to make the story too long. You have to remember that in this case, say if we have 50 or 60 submissions to go through over 2 days, that only gives the jury 10, 15 minutes, maybe at most, to consider each submission. So if it goes on for a long time and you give, say, 40 or 50 slides, then it doesn't help, because people aren't able to digest that kind of information if they're going through it that fast. The typical and the longest, sorry, the sweet spot in terms of the length of these submissions is around 20 slides. And sometimes we get people that provide fewer slides. That probably is not a good idea either. If there's only, say, 12 graphics or 12 pages in a given presentation, then it's not enough to give a full outline of what your project is about. So try and aim for around 20. It can be, 18, can be 22, but that's more or less what the sweet spot is. Now, in terms of the types of images on a slide, it's probably best not to make your slides too busy. Again, people try and cram a lot of images on a given slide. But if you have, a collage of pictures, or if you have maybe, 15 or 20 pictures, it's too busy. The jury isn't able to digest it. Generally speaking, anywhere between, say, 1 and 4 pictures on a slide, an individual slide, is around the right number of slides to be digestible by the jury and to tell the story in a fluid way. Another point about the PowerPoints: don't use renderings. The jury wants to see what the project is like. They don't want to see what the project might be like or how it's conceived in the mind of the designer. They want to see what is actually there. And in fact, if you do use renderings, and that counts as a negative, even though renderings can be made to look like a photo, to most people's eyes, you have to remember that the people on the jury are pros, and they can tell a rendering when they see it, even if it's well done. So, you're not going to get away with using renderings. And they're not going to consider them, because if the project is finished, which it must be in order to join the competition, then you should be able to show photographs of the real thing rather than concepts of what it might be. Another factor is to include to include people in your pictures. Very often, designers will see projects in terms of the conceptual with the architectural merits, and they will, if they include people within them, see that as sort of a pollutant, which takes away from the design or the purely aesthetic functionality of the building or the project that they've created. That's not the way to see it. That's not the way the jury sees it. The jury wants to see that the project has vitality. They want to see that it's being used either by the tenants, by the shoppers, say if it's a retail project, by people within the community, no matter what type of project it is, but particularly, say, if it is an open space project. And the way to do that is to show that there are many people there who are using it. That, is not an inflexible world. There will be some types of places that may be not that busy. Let's say if it's a residential project, You're never going to have, probably within the confines of a project, more people than actually live there, and so you are, constrained by that factor. But still, it always benefits you as a submitter of a project if there are plenty of people around, just to show that it is popular, that it's accessible as well, because the jury want to see that the project is stabilized, that it is a success, and the best way of doing that is probably to show that people are flocking there and that are using it in numbers. Okay, another factor to bear in mind is don't use too much text. We do get very often people that want to try and tell the story on the PowerPoint by using text, by explaining this and that. This doesn't really work. As I say, the purpose of the PowerPoint is to tell your story visually in a graphical way. The jury isn't going to read it. They won't have time to digest information that you type out onto the slides. Insofar as information is needed by the jury, then that is information that is included within the form that you fill out. And that, as I say, the jury that's assigned to deal with the submission will digest and understand. And then as that juror goes through your PowerPoint submission with the rest of the jury, he or she will explain the various factors that are included within the text and the application form. So it doesn't need to be on the PowerPoint itself. And if it is there, then it gets in the way, doesn't look very good, jury won't read it, so it's not a positive. So it's okay if you put, say, a title to show, I don't know, this is such and such aspects of the project, and this is the gardens, or this is illustrative of the lighting systems that are being used inside, things like that. If it's a very short blurb that explains individual things, but sometimes people put tables in there, put very densely worded textual explanations. That doesn't work. So just keep away from that. Insofar as you need text, and put it on the application form itself. All right, another aspect is to be sure to include both the inside and the outside of the project or the building, usually as the case may be. Of course, if it's open space, then it's just one aspect. But in general, there will be different issues, and you'll need to show both inside and outside. And sometimes people are in favor of doing either the outside or just the inside, and that doesn't work. So you need to have, a fairly good balance of both. And I can't really tell you what the balance will be. It depends on the project, but basically you need enough photos of both the inside and the outside that they give a good representation of the various aspects of the project that make it noteworthy and make it worthy of winning any of our awards. All right, finally, the advice that we'd give in terms of tone would be not to make this a commercial pitch. Very often the PowerPoints will be prepared by somebody in the marketing department. And it's instinctive, I think, in these situations to sort of create a spin, to create a way of selling the project, which in a sense you are, but it's not selling it in a commercial sense. You don't want to create a marketing scenario in which you show that this is something that it isn't. You really need to, which I mean, obviously marketing isn't necessarily in that way, but a marketing pitch will sort of elaborate and maybe exaggerate different aspects. We don't want that. We just want, plain 9 yards, and give us graphically the story of what the project represents. Please don't try and sell it too strongly, because that won't go down too well either. The jury is too well versed in that to be taken in by it. So just stick to the issues that are set out in the guidelines and represent the project in a way that focuses on those issues. All right, so at this point, I think we're going to open it up to questions and answers. I'm not sure if we have any questions at this point, but let me see. We do. Oh, here we go. Right, so first one I have here says for large-scale projects, is it expected for the entire project to be complete, or if the first phase is completed, it can be submitted? Okay, the answer is yes. It can be submitted. This is an issue that is laid out in the guidelines, so I'd recommend you read what it says in the guidelines about that. But if you are creating a large-scale project that may be developed over a series of many years, sometimes, it is absolutely possible to submit a single phase of the project, in which case just keep it to that phase and to the characteristics of that phase. And I think you would want to mention in the application that it is part of an ongoing project and there will be further phases. And I think probably within the graphic within the submission that shows the project within the context of the surroundings, then you might want to show where other phases are to be included in the future. But in general, you want to steer away from mentioning or showing renderings of what the future phases will be, and just focus on the information that relates to the phase that has been completed. All right, what do we have? Another one here. We are considering submitting Science Park for the Awards for Excellence, clarify eligibility, largest private R&D campus in Asia. Question one, since Science Park is an owner-occupied corporate research campus, would it be eligible for submission? Yes, absolutely. No restrictions on it being owner-occupied or anything else. And I suppose it bears mentioning at this point that those who were standing to enter a project would include, obviously, the developer, the owner, the designer, and in general, those who have some kind of an interest, a stake in creating that project. It can't be submitted by somebody that doesn't really have a stake. I mean, if you just sort of like a particular project, you won't have standing in making an application. But generally speaking, it'll be fairly clear whether or not you fulfill any criteria. And if there's any doubt as to whether or not you think you do have standing to make an application, then please just email us via the website and I'll answer and let you know. Now, section 2, does a project need to demonstrate commercial leasing activity, or can it be exclusively used by the developer owner? It can be used exclusively by the developer, the owner. This goes back, I think, to a question of stabilization, which is an issue I was going to bring up before we finish anyway. And it's rather a vexed question in the context of the competition. One of the requirements that we have in order for a project to be successful and therefore for the project to be submitted for an award is that it needs to be stabilized, by which we mean that it needs to have been fully up and running. Generally speaking, that it is pretty much fully leased, doesn't have to be completely leased, but certainly that as a going concern, it is viable, and that it's being used by the community. And that would require, generally speaking, that it has been launched and in use for around 12 months as a minimum. Now that can be flexible. And in this case, I think, where it's being exclusively used by the developer or owner, then I think you could say it will be stabilized pretty much as soon as the owner moves in, because at that point it will be up and running. They will presumably have hit the ground running, and you can say that it is basically stabilized and it's ready to go from the get-go. Generally speaking, if a project, say if it's tenanted, or whether it's office or retail, it does take a while for a sufficient critical mass of tenants to arrive in order for it to be considered to be stabilized and for to be viable as a going concern financially. So there's no absolute rule, but generally speaking, we would say, as a rule of thumb, 12 months would be required. Again, another exception to that would be probably in an open space or maybe a public project, such as a museum, which again would probably be up and running more or less as soon, or anyway soon thereafter, as it opens. So that's another potential exception to that. But again, if you have any question in your mind as to whether or not you consider it stabilized, then please drop me a line and I'll let you know. And this is an important issue, I think, because very often the submissions that we get are relatively new. Usually, say, if a designer or developer has recently completed a project there and it's, they consider the awards worthy, then, they want to put it out in the public eye, and so they will consider entering it into our competition. So it is always an issue that is front center with the jury. So just be aware that stabilization is an important factor that the jury will consider in deciding whether or not your project is awards worthy. All right, third question from the same person. Are there any specific considerations for corporate R&D campuses when evaluating submissions? Corporate R&D. I wouldn't say so. The same rules will apply to corporate R&D as they will to anything else. So have a look at the guidelines and see the extent to which the project meets those requirements. Of course, every project will have its own particular characteristics. I imagine a corporate R&D project may not, for example, have great placemaking factor. It may not, for reasons of corporate security, want to bring in large numbers of the community from outside in order to enjoy its facilities. That's fine. In that case, the jury will take into consideration that these are the constraints that exist, and it won't count against it. But I wouldn't say that there's anything in particular that an R&D facility would need to show in order to stand out. It just needs to be able to tick enough boxes among the various criteria to impress the jury. All right. Hi, our product from the Middle East eligible? I would say in this case, they are not for the Asia Pac Awards. The Middle East falls within the ambit of our European division. And so if you're looking to submit an award project from that area, then Middle East would go there. So you need to contact the European awards people, and they will give you some advice about how to project. All right, so next one. Can we put, and I would add actually that as far as the geographical boundaries are concerned, we go as far west as Central Asia. We've had projects in the past from Kyrgyzstan, I think was one, and I've seen some submission forms open this year from Pakistan, and certainly Pakistan is included within Asia, so that would be within the Asia jurisdiction. Can we put videos in the presentation? The answer is yes. That is applicable, and the jury will consider a video presentation. Again, please try not to make it too commercial. Sometimes people put in basically an advert for the project, so try not to make it too marketing oriented. But in principle, yes, videos are applicable and in fact are welcomed by the jury, as long as it shows various aspects of the project that are relevant to considering whether it can get an award. If the participant wins an award, is there a PR package we are required to purchase? The answer there is no. No, basically there isn't. And there are various ways in which we participate with the winners to promote packages on a PR basis in terms of providing badges and so on. I have to say, I'm not too much up to speed with the PR aspect of this. But if you drop me an email, then I can forward it to the relevant person, and then they can answer you in more detail. this question continues, are we allowed to publish PR social media posts on it? The answer is yes, again. And we can collaborate with you in terms of providing badges and maybe various suggestions as to how that can be done. Right, just to confirm, if you submit under category A and you find it more suited for category B, will the entry still have a chance to win under that new category? The answer is yes. The categories actually are set out for jury convenience rather than anything else. When the jury looks at individual projects, it tends to be useful for them to sort categories and consider projects that are within the same general bucket of typologies. And that's the only reason it's done. There's no ironclad rule. And so if any given project is considered to be more applicable to one project than the other, then the jury will simply switch the project on its own to that new category. So it's not a deal breaker at all. The type of category, it's useful, obviously, to get it right, certainly in terms of our initial jury meeting, to categorize it together with other projects of the same type. But if the jury thinks it's better suited to a different category, then it will simply move it over there. Let's see. Is there a time limitation on when the project was completed, say 2 to 3 years ago? There is no time limit. As I mentioned before, in order for it to be stabilized, generally speaking, we want to see a project that has been in use for 12 months, as a very rough rule of thumb. And in turn, if you're asking about the other direction, how old it can be, there's no limit. It can be, generally a good project will be a good project, and it will have staying power. I mean, it is true that, say if you get to maybe a 20-year-old project, it may be a bit sort of out of date or a bit out of fashion according to current modes. But in that case, and very often what has happened is that it has been updated, it has been revitalized along the way in order to make it relevant to today's commercial environment, whether that's for retail purposes, office, residential, in order to keep it up to speed. So there is no timeline either way, apart from the 12-month criteria that I mentioned before. Is there an awarding ceremony? If yes, are the winners required to join? If no, can the award be shipped to the country? So the answer is yes. The awards ceremony will be held at our Asia Pacific Summit, which is at the end of May this year. It will be in Hong Kong. Winners are not required to join. We certainly would welcome you to join, and the winners will be invited onto stage to receive the award on the main day of the program. So that is something that a lot of winners will want to attend, and they will fly in order to do that. There's no obligation to do that. And if it's not possible for a winner to attend, then we will arrange for somebody suitable to come up and pick up the award on your behalf. Also, winners to be announced prior to the ceremony. The winners, they won't be publicly announced. If you win an award, then you will be informed that you've won. And equally, if you haven't won, then you will be informed you haven't won. But there will be no public announcement. So the awards winners are projected out there on the day of our summit, just to sort of keep it interesting for the world at large. Okay, next one. What kind of financial data would you be expecting? Okay, so this is also sometimes a difficult issue to answer. Firstly, we do understand that financial information can be confidential, and that very often a developer or a tenant or anyone involved in submitting a project may not want to, on the grounds of confidentiality, to share certain information. So the first thing to that I would say is that any information that is submitted to us is submitted in confidence, and it will not go beyond the jury meeting. Even then, I understand that the information may be regarded as confidential and you don't want to share it. So in that case, I would say that in general, we wouldn't expect information that is so sensitive that you would never want to share it to be submitted. The idea of submitting the financials is to show that the project is viable in a commercial way, basically in order to show that it is stabilized. And one way of doing that is to show, well, it's tenanted up, and this is our cash flow, this is our revenue, we've achieved 90% of our projected income for the year, that type of thing. And it's not going into great balance sheet detail. It's simply information that will prove to the jury that it is financially viable. And if you have any questions about what is sensitive for you or about what you would want to disclose, then drop me an email, and I think we can come to a consensus about what you might provide us that would satisfy the jury. What often happens in this case is that submitters don't provide the level of depth that financial data that the jury needs in order to be satisfied that the asset is stabilized in the first instance. And then if the jury still considers the project to be worthy potentially of moving on to be a finalist, then it will still promote the projects to that stage and ask that further details, financial details, that justify the financial viability of the project be provided. So that's another way in which this is done. And then the second part of this question is, to what extent a financial detail will be expected for the submission? So that, I think I probably answered that as much as I can. Any given project is going to be different. So it will depend, whether it is retail or residential, office, or even a public project. If it's, say, a museum or a government project, then it won't be expected to show the same level of financial viability. And of course, if it's an open space project like a park, then it's not really an issue in the first place. So to an extent, this is a question that will be dependent upon the circumstances of any individual project. And it's kind of tough to answer in exact detail at this point. But just bear in mind that what the jury is looking to confirm is that it is commercially viable. And if you can provide information relating to that, which very often relates to how far has it been tenanted up, and to what extent has is the revenue being generated met the targeted goals, that's the kind of thing that the jury would want to be satisfied about. Okay, multiple areas of projects will have multiple architects or designers. Should we mention all? Yes, certainly you can. What we want in terms of designers is not the names of the individual architects, which sometimes people provide. What we want, unless that architect is acting in an individual capacity, which does happen sometimes. But generally speaking, when it's a firm of architects, we just want the firm. But beyond that, obviously there can be multiple different types of designers or architects that are involved, whether it's your structural engineers, whether it's your lighting designer, your interior designer, whether it's your master planner, all of that. So yes, you can include all of those in the form. And if a project wins, then all of those individual firms can be listed on the award certificate. And that's something that we would ask you about at the time when we come to draft up the certificates. So who do you want on there? And sometimes those can be quite a long list. And I've seen a dozen different firms sometimes appear on the award certificates under that design category. Can you please give example of a mixed-use project? We have a large open space as a golf course, residences, hotel, apartments, banquet, and restaurant using sustainability practices as its core foundation. Okay, well, I mean, that would certainly be a mixed-use project. Generally speaking, if you have, let's say, these days, more and more projects are mixed use just because they're more financially viable. And in fact, a lot of projects would simply not be developed unless there is a mixed use element to it. I mean, I suppose if it's a residential project, you may not have even, I mean, it might have a clubhouse, I suppose, but that wouldn't make it mixed use, I don't think. But if you have a residential project, let's say, that has a mall downstairs that involves retail, food and beverage, then that would be mixed use. And the same would go with an office project. Generally speaking, these days, new office projects probably have some kind of retail, so that would be a mixed use project. But then again, if the jury determines that it's categorized as an office project when it should be mixed use, then it will move it over into that category, and vice versa. So in this case, you say it has a golf course, residence, hotel, apartments, banquet, and restaurants. Yeah, I mean, that's about as mixed use as you can get, I suppose. So that would be the right category. And then, could you give an example of financial information required? This may be difficult for applicants as such information is usually sensitive. Yes, so that goes back to the question I answered before. We do appreciate that it can be. As I say, it doesn't need to be absolutely granular. We do get sometimes people providing us, their balance sheet with all kinds of details and pages and reams of details, which is fine, because certainly the jury can look at that and draw their conclusion. It doesn't need to be that extensive, nor does it need to be that formalized. I mean, you don't need to give us your P&L. It doesn't need to be something that's being authenticated by an accountant. We just need to know information that shows financial viability. And if you can do that in various ways, that would be applicable to your project, and different projects might demonstrate stabilization and financial viability in different ways, then that should be sufficient for the jury. So I'm sorry if I can't get exact in this, because there's no real exact answer. It's just a question of satisfying that question of proving that it's a commercially up and running project. Okay, that is the last question that's on Q&A. There were a couple of other things that I wanted to bring up on the basis of not having enough questions to answer. The one, I think we're probably pushing our time scale because I see we're up to an hour. But the one that I think I might just mention before we close out relates to sustainability. And these days, sustainability aspects are more and more important, as you, I'm sure, can imagine. And new buildings in particular will generally have sustainability features in them that can be leveraged for the purposes of this award project in order to promote it in the jury's eyes. So by all means, we would encourage the submission to detail what type of sustainability attributes your project has, and basically present them to the jury. Also, if you have photos of them, then that's also always useful to include in your presentation. And that's about it, unless we have any more questions. I don't think that's I don't think that we have any more to say. So at this point, I will thank everybody for attending. If you have any more questions, then please get in touch with me via the ULI Awards website portal, and I or someone else will be happy to come back to you and give you more color on whatever it is you need to know. So thanks again for attending, and thanks to Camille for web hosting this and managing the session. And as I say, please let us have your your applicants as they come in. All right, thanks very much, Keneal.
Okay. Thanks again for joining us, everyone, and thank you, Colin, for that informative session. We look forward to your applications.